It's time for our kitchen reveal. We have been redoing our kitchen what feels like for years, but definitely has been since Christmas, where we have been redoing our cabinets. So I am so thrilled and excited to show you our reveal and the makeover of the kitchen space. So a little bit of context, we live in a manufactured home. So this is a double wide trailer. The cabinets, when we had them put in, I did upgrade to solid wood doors and framing on the cabinets. And they were a dark cherry. Now they weren't actually cherry wood, they were a solid wood and they just had a dark cherry stain on them. And we bought this in 2006. And the stain that they had used after that many years and being a hard homestead working kitchen had started to lift and kind of peel in spots. So it kind of reached the point that I could no longer procrastinate painting the cabinets, even though I had had the paint and had intended on doing it. So with the cabinets, we prepped them and I just sanded down where it was flaking so that I got a smooth surface, but I didn't take all of the stain off and get all the way down to the bare wood, because frankly, that would have just taken a lot of time and a lot of labor that I didn't feel was a necessity. So after quite a bit of research, I settled on this brand of paint because it has the primer in it already and is self-leveling. And one of their brand promises is that you don't have to do a whole bunch of prep and that it will stick and give you good coverage and last. This is not sponsored by them in any way, shape, or form. This is just the company that I researched and ended up going with. It's also self-leveling. The other key factor is they have this surface prep, which is an all-in-one. It's a deglosser and a degreaser. Because in a kitchen, if you have any bit of grease on it, the paint will not stick to it well, and then it's going to scratch and lift really easily. So making sure it's degreased and deglossed was really, really essential. So I did 3 sessions with the deglosser and the degreaser, especially on this side of the kitchen, because obviously this is where we're cooking. And so these get quite a bit of grease, quite a bit of handling, even the grease from your fingers, especially around areas like the door, where you're going to be touching it. I wanted to make sure that that was fully clear so that I didn't have any issues down the road. So did that. And then I actually could not find the perfect color that I wanted for our bottom for this color. And so I went with the spruce and Irish garden, and I did 3 parts spruce to 1 part Irish garden. And you can see my Sharpie notes there to myself, because when I went to do a touch-up, I actually had used all of the paint that I had initially mixed up. And then I had some areas that had gotten something spilt when it was cooking, and it just lifted off. Like you could see where it had spilt down. I honestly don't know what it was, but I went to wipe it off and it just took all of the paint. And I'm like, oh, gotta do a touch up. But when I went to grab the paint cans, I realized I didn't remember, because I didn't write down famous last words. I will remember this, never remember it later. So it took me a few times to actually get it color matched back again. So this time I was smart and wrote down what my exact ratios were. On the bottom, I went with this blue color, which I absolutely love. Part of the reason is our kitchen is really, really dark. It's on the north side of our house, and living in the mountains of the Pacific Northwest Washington, we don't get a lot of sunlight anyways. But when we put the covered porch on the front of our house, that even took less, we had less light coming in, I should say. And so the kitchen felt very, very dark and cavernous. So I wanted something that was bright, but I did not want white on the bottom. I wanted something with color, but I couldn't go too dark, because the whole point of me redoing them is I was trying to add brightness. So went with this blue, and I love this color. And I would have done it on the top, except again, I really needed the light to be able to bounce. Obviously, I'm filming in here. I do a lot of stuff in the kitchen with photography, those types of things. So I need more light. Light is always a friend when you're doing that. So I decided to go with this white color on the top portion to just bounce back any light and to capture extra any light that we could. However, going from dark cherry, as one can see, this is the inside. No, I did not paint the inside. When I was doing it, I told myself, I'll go back and paint the inside of these cupboards later, and I totally lied. I am never going to go back and paint the inside of these, ever. I just don't care that much, in all honesty. So this is what it looked like on the inside. So you can see the darkness here. This was the actual color, this light blonde color of what is beneath this stain. So you can kind of see a little bit, it's kind of like a light maple, basically. So I left these on. I did not take them off. I did not take the food out of the cupboards, which if you're real close and looking, you can actually see there's a tiny bit of paint here on the cocoa powder because neatness and I are not best friends. So I left the doors on, I left the foods in the cupboard, and I did it all by hand. I did where you brush it on and then you use a roller so that you don't see the brush marks in the paint. And that is how I did it. Now, as to how many coats, well, that, my friends, this was 9 coats of paint. Yes, 9 coats. At about the 5th coat, we had total coverage where you didn't see any of the dark coming through, but you had these different areas, especially on the larger flat panels here, where it was really dull or it was really shiny, and like big splotches of like, it would be dull here and then it would be shiny here. And this is a matte, so this doesn't have a lot of gloss in it anyways. It wasn't that it was mixed up, it was just the way that it dried and how many coats it needed. So 9 coats later, we have full coverage, and I love the way that they turned out. I actually did the bottom cupboards in the blue color, and on the other half of the kitchen, I did the upper cupboards, and those I did for Christmas. We were hosting Christmas, and I had actually just kind of wiped down the cupboards before Christmas. And when I wiped down the cupboards, all that cherry stains came off. And you know how it is like when you're hosting? So I had like these huge streaks, like it just looked hideous. So I'm like, okay, it's do or die. I'm painting these cupboards, at least the bottoms, before we have guests and are hosting for Christmas. And so I did all of the bottoms, and then I did the other half of the upper side before Christmas. But then Christmas was here and I had ran out of energy. I got sick and just could not get it done. So then fast forward to May, I still hadn't done the other upper half of these. So my kitchen was living in this very much state of half and half. And then we have the photo shoot for the reissue of my book, Handmade, which we'll be releasing next year. But the publishing house was coming with a photographer and the team to do the photo shoot for that. And so it was kind of one of those do or die things. Like I needed to have these matching. And I finished, because of the 9 coats of paint issues, 12 hours before the photo shoot started. I actually got done with all of the painting, but I'm so excited. Now, I did swap out all of the door poles to these, which is kind of a brassy kind of, not really bronze. It's really much more of a brass gold color. Before we had silver and nickel, and it is amazing to me the transformation of just paint and swapping these out, like how much those can transform a room. Now, we did, if we go way back to what our original state of the kitchen did, it had been a couple of years back that we did replace the countertops and we put an actual full backsplash in. In manufactured homes, or at least ours when we bought it, they don't really do backsplashes. They just had like a section of tile that just came up to here, and then you had all sheetrock. And as much cooking and canning and preserving as we do, of course, as you can imagine, the sheetrock was really getting stained. So I had tried to be my own remodeler and had gotten some of these tin things, and we had just pretty much glued them up. They looked like very vintage. It looked nice. They looked like vintage, like kind of like the ceiling tile tins, you know, the stamped tin. But it still felt really, really dark. And the tin, it wiped off well, but I was really looking again for that light. And so when we replaced the countertops, because the tile was also on the countertop wraps starting to pop off and come off, we went with this quartz. And we looked at marble, we looked at butcher block, we looked at granite. I really just couldn't justify the cost of the granite and the marble at that time. And we have the natural wood here on our island, which I love, but I do have to condition this and that type of thing. It can stain, especially if you set like the cast iron, which happens. The nice thing is I can sand it down, which we've had to do light sandings to get marks off of this. So I really didn't want to do butcher block countertops. So we settled on this quartz, and I love the quartz. It's held up really great. It cleans well. I'm super, super happy with that decision. And I don't have to seal it like there's no upkeep like you would have with the granite or the marble, which is another key thing for me. Now, our stove, This is a different stove. If you've been watching the channel or inside the membership and seeing a lot of the tutorials over the years, we used to have an electric stove. So when we bought our manufactured home, which was back in 2006, it just came with a standard electric coil, cooktop, and oven. And it was kind of always one of those things, like that was what we could afford at the time. And it was like, okay, well, when this breaks and needs to be replaced, then we'll save money now and upgrade to what we really want at a future date. Well, most of the time, the things that they put in manufactured home are not high end. So usually any of the appliances or the things they put in, you can count on them lasting for, a little bit, but usually they're going to break pretty soon. Well, that electric stove just held on. So it finally started to go out. We're going on I've had this almost 3 years now. And we were having to constantly replace the element in the oven. And so I just got to the point where I just kept 2 backup at all times in our storage space because I was always having to replace that element. And there was nothing wrong with our electricity. It was just the system inside the stove. So we knew after getting it closer and closer, that the elements would need to be replaced, we went ahead and looked and we decided to go ahead with propane in our area and put in a propane stove. I had never had a propane stove. I'd never baked, I'd never cooked with propane, except like camping, like that type of thing, but not in a house. All the homes that we've lived in and that I've cooked in have had electric. So after a lot of looking, I wanted something that would have to fit in the space because we had already redone here. But I wanted to make sure that it had a full oven on the inside. So some of the vintage ones that I had looked at were beautiful stoves, and they were standard on the outside, but when you looked at the inside, they had a lot smaller. And as I said, we do a from scratch. I needed a full size oven. So this was the one that I found. It's a cafe brand. And I went for the white with it's supposed to be kind of like the copper. That doesn't really look copper. Like this little piece looks like copper, but it's more of a bronze with the finish there. But what I love about it is there's actually 6 burners on top here, whereas on my electric stove, I only had 4. And so I love that I can have 6 burners, same amount of space. It just seems like so much more use of this as far as a cooktop goes. And this is the burner. I wasn't sure how it would work with canning. I had never canned on a propane stove before, but it works fabulous. And so this is the burner that I use the canner on. I'm actually able to regulate the heat a little bit better with the canner than on the electric, so I have less siphoning. So this is she's been a champ and a workhorse as far as all the way around from the oven. And a lot of people, when I was researching what type of oven to get, because you can get some that have an electric oven, but they have the gas propane top. And there was a lot of debate back and forth on how well the propane ovens cooked versus electric. And I went with the full propane and not electric because when our power goes out, I can still use the propane. And so not having to worry about the generator, I would still be able to cook in the oven with it propane during power outages. And I think it bakes fabulous using it on the propane bake. I've had some people were like, oh man, I hate the way that the propane oven bakes. It's worked great for me. It does wonderful with bread, pastries, pies, all of the things. I adore it. So totally love this oven. It was completely worth it. If you are looking at that one, highly recommend it. Again, no endorsement. This isn't sponsored by any of these brands or anything like that. Just my honest opinion, and we really do like them. If you want to catch this bad boy in action when it comes to canning, you can watch this video where I share a old farmer's wife's trick to make easy canning of pears, and grab that here.